You're listening to America's Most Challenging Issue, where BahaiTeachings.org interviews community builders across the nation who are inspired by the Baha'i vision of the oneness of humankind. Join us as we explore their work, bringing about racial unity and establishing a more just and equitable society. I'm your host, Masood Olufani. Welcome to America's Most Challenging Issue. I'm your host, Masood Olufani. Parent University, a community building initiative based in Savannah, Georgia, launched in 1999 to serve the needs of struggling families through educational programming and training. Created to bridge the gaps which existed between the public school system and student achievement and retention by strengthening family cohesion, the program was launched by longtime Savannah resident Michael O'Neill, who consulted with the community in identifying its objectives and framing its goals. In its 20-year history, Parent University has served thousands of Savannah residents. In 2015, Michael was named one of the heroes of the 500 by Fortune magazine. O'Neill, originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, has lived in Savannah for nearly 45 years, where he has worked as a maintenance electrician for the International Paper Company. A member of the Baha'i Faith, the father of 4 and grandfather of 10, was inspired in part by the faith's view that a healthy family serves as a nexus for individual and communal advancement. As the Baha'i writings so eloquently state, in a world of interdependent peoples and nations, the advantage of the part is best to be reached by the advantage of the whole, and no lasting result can be achieved by any of the component parts if the general interest of the entity itself are neglected. In this episode of America's Most Challenging Issue, I sit down with Michael to discuss his work in community service and how that work is informed and shaped by his understanding of the Baha'i Faith. Michael O'Neill, welcome to America's Most Challenging Issue. I would like to begin by asking you to describe the circumstances that led you to found Parent University.
Oh, well, thank you. It's been almost 20 years now, so I try and stay sharp around this because, over time, stories evolve. But specifically, Parent University is something that was created out of a need in the community to bridge a gap. One of the many challenges that we have in communicating in our community, and it was no less so back in 1999 or even before then. Very specifically, I was serving on an organizing entity in the Baha'i Faith called a local spiritual assembly, which is the executive body of any group of Baha'is of a certain number in a locality. And we had just had a mayoral race, and the mayor, his name was, he's passed now, but Mayor Floyd Adams approached the Baha'is and asked for a representative of the Baha'i community to serve on his Human Relations Commission. He was, like, as I say, our first Black mayor, and he thought because the Baha'is seemed to exhibit this kind of pro-community, unity and diversity presence, that it would be good for one of us to serve on his Human Relations Commission. So I was chosen because I was the secretary of the, as I say, local spiritual assembly. And so I went to serve on that commission. While on that commission, one of the issues that came up in our community was an issue with schools. I guess there were lots of issues, but the ones that stood out are the ones that where a child or a parent would perceive that a teacher would say something disparaging about them connected with their race. Like, you people, that's why you people aren't so and so. And it had gotten to the point where in 2 or 3 locations, they were about to begin a boycott of the schools. Well, of course, the mayor didn't want that. And he said, well, what can my commission do about that? And so we decided back in 1999 to put together a 1-day conference to what we called Can We Talk, so that the community could come together and have a collaborative experience. Of course, it has extended far beyond that, but that is the genesis reason why I got involved in this and what has become Parent University. And that was to bridge the gap in communication and bring the community together.
And that's very interesting. I know that you studied at Savannah State University, which was the same institution that my little brother graduated from a couple of years ago. It's a great school. I'm curious about where do you feel like that, we can choose to spend our time a number of ways during the course of our day. You have consciously and deliberately chosen to spend your time in community service. And I'm wondering where that impetus, that motivation in you comes from. And could you speak a bit about that, the roots of that?
Yes. As you mentioned in your introduction of me, I'm from Philadelphia originally. I had no idea where Savannah, Georgia was when I was 16 years old. I remember when my uncle offered for me to come to Savannah and study. I was at the University of Pittsburgh, and my uncle offered for me to come to Savannah and study. And I said, well, why would I want to go where that guy Castro is? So just to show you where I was as far as Savannah is concerned. But circumstances, the way circumstances played out, I ended up in Savannah, Georgia, at Savannah State College at the time, what they called the College by the Sea. And in my coming to be a part of the culture in Savannah, I ran into a person, actually a white guy, a white gentleman. His name was George Gary. And he and I, strangely enough, pledged a black fraternity called Kappa Alpha Psi. I don't know if I can use that. You can cut it out later if you need to. But Kappa Alpha Psi. And I wondered why George, who was white, would pledge Kappa. Well, he began talking to me about this faith of his. And as you can imagine, this faith was called the Baha'i Faith. And coming from Philadelphia, I was more than a little skeptical because I hadn't heard about it. And of course, being a 17-year-old from Philadelphia, certainly I would have heard about the Baha'i Faith if it was something that needed to be heard about. And so I began to study some of these books George had so that I could let him down easy about this faith that he seemed so enamored with. And that began my journey, my brother, into what has changed my life and, frankly, the lives of many, is that I found the Baha'i Faith. And I found out far from being something that I could disprove, that the more I read about it, the more I learn about it, the more deeply I become enamored with it. And my life begins to attempt feebly to model what the Baha'i Faith teaches. And among the things that the Baha'i Faith teaches, not only the oneness of humankind, but the pursuit of justice, the love of diversity. But one part that really it really touches my heart, and that's the part, the emphasis on service to humankind. As a matter of fact, one of the references in the Baha'i writings is that service to humanity is service to God, and it's like worship. So, wow. That's amazing to me. And the emphasis in the Baha'i Faith, not so much on the teachings, and the words, which are in humongously numerous, the words that exist in the Baha'i Faith, but the emphasis is on deeds. There's lots of words out there, and the Baha'i Faith is not short on words, but the emphasis is on what do you do? And that has molded my life. And so the things that I've come to learn since that time is that if you want to demonstrate how you feel about something, demonstrate it through your deeds. And so I have chosen to lead my life and to lead as an example. What did Michael O'Neill do?
It's very powerful. One of the things in your story that really resonates for me is that when I was investigating the Baha'i Faith, I too went into it with the intention of proving the Baha'is wrong. Like they were mistaken and they had missed something. They had interpreted something wrong because clearly I had never heard of the faith, so it must be wrong. And of course, that's the beginning of your love affair with the writings of Baha'u'llah. And invariably, you eventually embrace the faith, and it's a wrap. So it's very, very interesting. I'd like to turn our focus to the issue of race. We know that Savannah is a city with a very rich history. It's often viewed through the prism of race, whether that's the city's historical ties to the slave trade. We could talk about Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, or the disproportionate rate of incarceration of Black and brown men. It reflects in many ways, as do many American cities, the legacy of racism. Can you talk a bit about how you see that legacy reflected in the challenges facing families today?
Wow. We are so immersed in this legacy that it's hard not to talk about it. I mean, the things, everything around us didn't just appear yesterday. We got to where we are from a journey, and an unbiased examination of history will realize, particularly in the last 500 years, we could go back further, but in the last 500 years, makes it clear that there's little that's not tied to race. Very little. Of course, now, one of the things that's interesting, that I find interesting about this discussion of race is that mankind hasn't always been where mankind is today. You see, and a practice that may have had certain elements of necessity at a time, even for social security, not in the way we think of it, but how do people take care of each other through their whole continuum? There may have been ways to do that which aren't appropriate today. And of course, you are as familiar as I with in the Baha'i writings, there was a time when the discussion of slavery was specifically talked about, and the founder of the Baha'i Faith, Baha'u'llah, said it's no more. It's no more acceptable for anyone to make the practice. So and when I think about it, I like to think about it in the time since then, since that declaration. But if you live in Savannah, I mean, just like any other city in the South, there's a disparity of wealth. There's a disparity of opportunity. There are chronic issues with justice or the lack of justice. And the most prominent thing that I still feel is the psychologically entrenched way we all see each other. We all see each other, even those people who would consider themselves enlightened. We see each other in this prism of skin hue, and it is a topic we will be pursuing for some time, Masood. And so, one of the reasons I do what I do is so that people continue to learn and understand their environment, understand what they're up against on both sides. Because if you can't talk about it, then it's hard to do anything about it. So that's one of the reasons why this pursuit of learning is one of the paths we've taken.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that. I was thinking in the context of the Baha'i Faith, as you were talking, we know that oneness of mankind is the core principle of the faith. It's kind of the central hub of the wheel, if you will, around which all the other principles revolve.
Yes.
And Abdul-Baha, the appointed successor of Baha'u'llah, prophet founder of the religion, says, there is perfect brotherhood underlining humanity, for all are servants of one God and belong to one family under the protection of divine providence. And I'm wondering if this notion of the oneness of mankind was something that you were thinking about when you conceived of the idea of Parent University.
As you said, unity or the oneness of mankind is the pivot around which the Baha'i Faith circles. And once again, my story of how I became a Baha'i, it was actually a gentleman who was a white guy who told me, a young, brash Philadelphian teenager, about the faith. And so when I learned about it and with the feeling that I also had for this gentleman, I admired him very much. And with his reiteration of this oneness, I could feel it viscerally. Sometimes we're kind of discouraged about some things. Sometimes life kind of not dulls the light a little bit about issues like, can we really be unified? Can we really be one? And you look around and you say, maybe not. Maybe I'm going to have to lower the bar a little bit of my expectations. And then you meet somebody or something or you run into something like the faith, and then your feelings are elevated again because this is God's plan. And so within what the faith says about this oneness are also subcategories like justice, like education. All these things need to be in place to allow this oneness to flourish. And so everything in my working world is around creating pillars to establish this oneness upon. And so that's how it works into my thinking about Parent University. Also, my life path. I left college and went to the local paper mill and put my electrical engineering technology learning from Savannah State College into work as an electrician, which is actually a much more lucrative choice than the engineering technology choice. But what I learned, and at the same time, I'm married now, and I'm a dad of 2, 3, 4 children. And I'm realizing that at work, I'm being trained constantly. And as a dad, I'm being trained never. So when this challenge came up that I was speaking to you about, where people were talking about the distance in communication between schools and families and boycotts and stuff like that, I said, this looks like a training matter. And at work, whenever I don't know something or need more information, my job trains me on it. They may send me to some far-flung place to a 3-day conference. And here's the thing. I'm excited that my job has decided to invest in me some time training. But I also remember when my child's teacher called me to school and said, Mr. O'Neill, maybe there's something you can do better to prepare your child. I remember that feeling too. And it wasn't exciting. Quite the opposite. I felt attacked, or at very least in a deficit place. Person was telling me something's wrong with me. And so what I realized is that because of what the faith says about the human mind being like minds being like places of inestimable gems, or gems of inestimable value. I said, well, why don't we, I offered to all these parents in our community, why don't we just get some training about parenting? Then we'll be better able to talk with schools about our path forward. So everything I've ever done with Parent University has been tied to the learnings I've had as a Baha'i.
You know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the present line of action in the Baha'i world community, right? Centered around these core activities, which are essentially a methodology, right? A systematic methodology for strengthening our communities. And a lot of the issues that you've been talking about, be they racism, systemic poverty, or just a lack of knowledge, right? It seems to be that these children's classes, these junior youth groups, these devotional gatherings, these study circles, all centered around the Word of God, are meant to fill in some of those gaps and give the community the learning that it needs in order to strengthen itself spiritually, which in turn has an impact on how those families, those individuals relate to one another. So I'm wondering, can you talk a bit about how you see the synergy between Parent University and the line of action, the core activities? Do you see a synergy there? And what does that look like for you?
Well, there's a couple of things you're saying there. It's very interesting stuff. The Parent University is a social action. Okay? Which means we do Parent University to serve this community. That's why we do it. There's no strings attached. We do it, as I say, because in my mind, service to the community is worship to God. And so I can't do enough, you know, and it looks like to the recipient, it may look like, gee, Mr. O'Neill is sacrificing this, that, and the other. And to me, it's like, man, I'm the luckiest guy on the planet, right? Because I'm able to do this service, you know. That being said, but the core activities you discuss are like, it's like exercise. It's like, how do we get ourselves fit for a thing? You know, maybe we go jog. Maybe we do some memorization if we want to, you know, there's lots of things we do to prepare ourselves to be better. And the core activities, which are, you know, devotional gatherings, which we pray, which we connect ourselves to God, put you in connection with the divine word. Now, you can say whatever prayer you want to say, you know, but just the exercise of doing it is just wonderful. So then when you're working with our junior youth, our young people, and you're sharing with those sharing with those young human beings elevated words, elevated concepts, you are giving them a step up in their environment, which, as we can all speak to, they're not going to get a lot of that on commercials, and they're not going to get a lot of that on TV and radio. So we're creating an environment where they can elevate above their surroundings and think of things in a more lofty way. And this continues right on through to we're adults and we do things that like we call study circles. You see, which is adults sitting around having elevated discussions about things. Masood, where do you just find very few elevated places? You can feel it. You can feel it inside. Most places that we have to have discourse these days are at a very primitive place. The emotions, when I mean primitive, I mean the emotions they attach themselves to are not the lofty emotions. They're those guttural or primitive emotions. So if you're going to be strong in the elevated thought, you've got to practice that. And what these core activities do is give you practice. And what Parent University, the whole reason for Parent University is so that people will flee from this concept of finishing learning. We want to run from that like it's the plague. Learning never stops. You have to always be tied to knowledge. You see, and once again, connected, in my opinion, to the writings that I have had privy to be a part of. So whatever you want to learn, we want people to be comfortable learning it. You see, then the environment becomes your university. You don't have to necessarily, of course, you could walk into a formal university, but we want you to see your whole environment as your university. And we want to acknowledge that behavior. We want to highlight that behavior to your peers, to your children. So you become a lamp in the community, a shining lamp and a brilliant star, which is a couple of the awards we also give our parents. And
That's awesome. That's awesome. You know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about this concept, the spiritual principle of humility. And in doing some research about Parent University, one of the things that really struck me was the way that you consciously engaged the community in a posture of humility and learning as you were designing and thinking about the shape that this great initiative was going to take. And we know that, in the context of the Baha'i Faith, this attitude, this posture of learning is something that all Baha'is around the world are called upon to do and to maintain.
Yes.
So that, as you said, the learning never stops. And I'm wondering about how you saw that posture of learning, that attitude of humility, as being an effective way to engage with the community, how that helped you to formulate the structure for Parent University.
Oh yes. Well, it's that's posture of humility, and that posture of learning is something that's essential to this concept of consultation. If you don't have that in consultation, then you're just dancing through it. Then you're actually probably pretending to agree. If you don't feel humbled by the other humans, then you should examine where you are in the conversation, because you're probably thinking you're going to trick somebody at some point because you have an elevated place in the consultation, which in fact you don't. But this practice of consultation, which I learned in these local spiritual assembly environments, that we talked about, and which is something you have to develop, is something that allowed me at the time of the start of Parent University to approach parents. You see, because the system had a stance, the school system had a stance, and these are all people, highly trained experts, and are paid to do this job. But then the community leaders had a stance, and because they were talking to each other over top of the community, see, the community wasn't able to participate in the dialogue. You see, so I represented myself as a parent. That was a valid, logical, honest representation. And I went to small groups of parents and asked simple questions like, what would you support? What do you think we need? You see, most of the time, it's well-meaning. Now, it's well-meaning stuff, but those people who we have deemed experts offer something because they're the expert, and we just kind of follow, even though we don't necessarily feel it.
Call it the Superman or the rescue syndrome.
Yes, absolutely. God bless them all. God bless us all. But the process we're pursuing is this process of total engagement, universal participation by all protagonists. That means if I'm the leader, that means I'm the head servant. That means I'm the lowest body in there. And I'm just listening for what you need. And if I can deliver what you need, that's a good day for me. That's my posture. If my job is to get the chair, if my job is to to move the curtain. If my job is to make you comfortable so that you can participate, and I'm able to pull that off, see, that's a good day. And if that is humble, if that's what we're calling it, I'll continue to try and do better at it. But that's the difference. I was able to talk to small groups of parents as a parent, and by writing down what they said and engaging them in the process, every small group I left, I said, we're going to meet again. And when we all come together, we're all going to assume this posture, and we're all going to create something bigger than us. And so when all these small groups came back together many months later in this bigger meeting, we created Parent University. But at that point, my friend, it was not my idea anymore. It was our idea.
Yes.
And that's, to me, that's why we're here talking about it 20 years later.
It's beautiful. I'm thinking about, the idea of servant being the highest, the apex of individual achievement in the context of the Baha'i Faith. So it's not that you are a doctor or that you are a lawyer or a successful business person or a successful artist or whatever, a public figure. It's how much your life conforms to the station of servitude to your fellow man, your fellow woman, that defines your greatness or your significance in the context of the Baha'i Faith. And that's just it's a wonderful concept to hold in mind, especially in a world where we live in, where so personality driven, and it's all about being famous and being known. It's just a wonderful, wonderful way to move through the world. Parent University is 20 years old now, man.
It's a good thing I was so young when I started.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a bit about what you feel. You've had some skin in the game for a minute, for 20 years. You've had 20 years worth of experience, 20 years worth of experimentation. And I'm interested to find out, what are some core learnings that you feel you've taken back from this process that has helped to inform you going forward? As a community servant, as a Baha'i, how has it informed your life?
Yeah, there are times. There's several, Masood. And I don't know if I'll be able to talk about them in any priority or just I'll just as they come to me. Honest working with people is a high energy thing. And so if you're going to work with people sincerely, you need to get up for it. You need to get up for it because it's all about relationships. And if you're going to, if you have a specific thing you want to get out of a relationship with a person, beyond the honest advancement of your relationship, that's going to be like a resistant element to the relationship developing. That makes any sense to anybody. What you have to do, what I've learned is that I have to take every relationship for what it is and value it. And value it. Every relationship. Because what I've learned is that regardless of where the relationship starts, what I have been shown over 20 years is that sometime 10 years later, the relationship you thought was not going to mean much was key, was the very key to launching the next 10 years. And so if I deemed that relationship unworthy of nurturing for whatever reason, I actually reduced the chances of success. And even more than that, I reduced the chances of this relationship becoming something that it should be with me and this person, which may even be bigger, but it can also have an effect on everything. And you don't know it because you don't deem the relationship important. So that's the first thing I'd say, is that every relationship, man, is precious. from the guy on the street who's down on his luck and maybe disheveled and may not be at his height, of presentation on that day. You better be thankful that God sent that guy your way. You don't know what you're going to do for each other in the course of the day. But that also means for every grandmother, every child, every person of note, every person of lack of note, you've got to treat each one of those as a gift. That's one thing I've learned. And the other thing is to be consistent. That doesn't mean you have to be good at a thing or an expert at a thing. You just be consistent. If a person tells you something and you say, I'm going to try and do it, just give it a shot. No one expects you to be Superman. As a matter of fact, people are oftentimes more comforted by your lack of being a Superman. You see, even though television and all this try to sell these superheroes, humans love humans. See, so those human things about us that makes people love us. I'm going to use the word that make people love us and ready to stand with us side by side. And the other thing I've learned is that we can never dream big enough. If anyone had asked me where we would be 20 years from now, I would have failed miserably in my assessment of what my life would be like today. I would have failed miserably. And so in the writings, it's often said, if we move the concourse, which is the place, the structure where the divine reside, in imagery, the concourse will move with us and come to our aid. And that is so true. So I often plan things that I have no idea how it's going to work. And at the end of the day, it works. And I know it's because help came that I didn't see.
Wow, there's so many wonderful notes of learning there that that we can take from and apply in our own lives on a daily basis, whether we're running an organization like Parent University, that wonderful initiative, or whether we're just serving our family, being present in our family life, in our friendships, in our relationships. I remember once I heard a wonderful talk by a Baha'i scholar out of Canada, and he was talking about things that have intrinsic and extrinsic value. And intrinsic, of course, is something that it comes into being, having. And extrinsic value, of course, being something that we apply to it. And he talked about how a homeless person, the most degenerate, the most disempowered person in our society, is infinitely times more valuable than all the accumulated wealth in the world. And I just thought that was an extraordinary statement. It still, when I think about it, moves me today.
Yes. Oh my. Okay, I don't want to get off the pole. I've oftentimes said in the prayer, read prayers where written in our faith where it's God speaking and saying, I love your creation more than I love the creation of the sun, of the stars. Come on. I mean, we're these incredible packages of love and potential. And until we see that in each other, it remains dormant or inert. And we have to bring those things out of each other. And that's what we're doing.
Absolutely. And we're talking essentially about encouragement, aren't we? Consistent encouragement.
We're talking about encouragement. And you know what? And accompaniment. That's, what I have learned, one of the core values that I've learned, that when I talk about encouraging relationships, one of the ways that you encourage relationships is to walk with that person. It's so often we give somebody a pat on the back and say, see you, I'll see you next time. But you know what? When we help each other to achieve a thing, a couple of things happen. We both learn from each other. it levels the field. It levels the playing field in which we're interacting, you know, and the relationship becomes so much more substantial as the result of that accompaniment. You know, even if when we were young or something, we helped our dads or something work on a car, just for instance, and we're just standing there. And you're handing them tools or what have. We didn't really necessarily do the technical part, but remember the feeling of being a part of it when the car started. You see, it's just accompanying each other. So we have to also, and so the people in Parent University today, when we talk about the new partnerships and the new interest that's being shown to us all over the nation. Masood, the way the participants swell up, you see, because they know they did it as much as I did it. And so we have accompanied each other along this journey. And that's another huge learning. You know, don't leave the pack. You might even have the wherewithal to get out ahead of the pack, but make sure to always come back to the pack and share whatever it is you've learned with the mass.
I love that. Well, we've spent some time covering a lot of ground. And before we go, I just wanted to ask you, as you're thinking and you're reflecting on your time with Parent University, your service, any parting words of wisdom that you can share with our audience and the listeners and with me that you feel are important for us to reflect on and keep in our hearts as we move forward?
No, the challenge of race is a challenge that will propel us. When we emerge from this, we'll be better collectively. And so be it that things aren't like we want them to be, but the time will come when they will be, and we will look back and say that we got through this together, every one of us on the planet.
Thank you so much, Michael, for being with us, man. This has been amazing. I feel like I'm just overjoyed with all of the things that you've shared. Thank you so much for being part of America's Most Challenging Issue. Appreciate it, brother.
I appreciate you, brother.
You've been listening to America's Most Challenging Issue. And remember, all effort and exertion put forth by man from the fullness of his heart is worship, if it is prompted by the highest motives and the will to do service to humanity. I'm your host, Masood Olufani. Thanks for joining me. Until next time.